Sam, I know we don't agree on everything, but I think at the very least we can agree that is one of the best episodes of SpongeBob of all time.
It absolutely
is. That fair?
That meme is absolutely accurate.
Yeah, well, I sent that to Sam earlier this week, but I thought it was highly relevant, especially to the church discussion we had in one of our earlier episodes. But yeah, I thought we'd make it a little fun here. So anyway, hello and welcome, everybody. We're on episode 9 already. It's kind of crazy. And we have our first guest today, Mr. Kenny, my new brother-in-law as well, Sammy's new husband.
Woo-hoo!
Kenny, welcome to the show. Glad you could make it here. This is going to be a fun one.
Thanks for having me. Yeah. As Max said, my name's Kenny, and I'm Sammy's husband. But I'm also a Christian and a scientist. So a little bit of background. I grew up in a Methodist church. Been going to church since I was a kid. And I'm also a physicist. So I'm currently in the 6th year of my PhD for a PhD in theoretical physics. So
I get to call you a doctor soon, right?
Yeah, coming up April 8th is my defense.
April 8th, I can officially say Dr. Kenny.
That's correct, yeah.
Dr. Kenny. Can I call you Professor?
Mr. and Mrs. It's going to be Dr. and Mrs.
Okay. Oh, yeah, that'll be fun. Well, I mean, you could do your PhD, Sam.
I could go get my PhD.
It'll be fun.
And
anyway,
doctor, and then people can make all sorts of sexist assumptions about us.
Well, there you go. Perfect. But anyway, yeah, of course, Kenny, thank you again for being here. This will be a fun conversation and something we've talked about doing for a while. So thank you for being the first honored guest.
I'm excited.
Kenny's a good guy. We talk science all the time, and he uses a lot of big words that I pretend to know. But this will be very interesting. Like, I want to hear more about the Big Bang and some of the theoretical physics stuff that goes on and how you kind of tie religion and science together. So, of course, that is the theme of today's episode. Is there anywhere in particular you want to start with this? I know we talked a little bit about, the Big Bang. What do you think is the most relevant starting point here? I'll let you kind of be the guide. Pretend you're Carl Sagan or you're Neil deGrasse Tyson or something in Cosmos.
Yeah, we can start off with the Big Bang. So I guess my big main hot take for today is that there's no conflict between science and faith. That science and the Bible in particular, which I'm familiar with, go together hand in hand. I consider it a privilege to wake up every morning and study God's creation. So yeah, we can kick it off with the Big Bang, which I guess more technically we should call inflationary cosmology. So just to kind of give an overview of what that means, Sami has this wonderful picture for us here. So time starts at t = 0 at the very left of the picture. And the very first thing that happens is inflation. This is a period of very rapid expansion in the universe. There's really this huge exponential expansion, which only lasts for a short period of time. So that's, you see at the very left, you can have a pinpoint, and then you grow very quickly to something big. And in the first few seconds of the universe's life, that inflationary period ends, and you get this kind of slow growth after that, where you have particles coming to existence, then nuclei forming, then atoms forming, and then over many millions of years, stars, galaxies, and whatnot start to form. And now in today's universe, dark energy has taken over, and the expansion of the universe is now accelerating again. So the universe is continuing to grow, and it's even growing at a quicker and quicker rate thanks to dark energy. So that was a lightning review of what the kind of accepted cosmology that physicists have come up with to explain how we got here.
I mean, you're kind of talking about the accepted theory. I mean, is it even a theory anymore, or do we this is pretty much fact, right?
Yeah, I would say that probably what I've described so far is pretty close to facts. I think there's definitely a lot of details that we don't understand quite yet. So, for example, like what is at the very left end point at that little tiny point right there? Like, what is that? We don't know what that singularity is, or what came before that. We're not quite sure. We also don't quite know the underlying mechanism that started inflation, that first period of really rapid expansion. We have some guesses, but that's not quite firmed up yet. But the overarching story here is pretty well mapped out and verified.
So we don't know. Kind of. This is where I love talking about the movie Interstellar, and where some of the astrophysics stuff goes over my head.
That's
But,
kind of
yeah. Prior to the Big Bang, I mean, we don't really know if there was anything prior, but in the context of religion, God was there before the Big Bang because he created the Big Bang. How do you fit those two together? If that
that's a great question. And I think this is kind of a clinch point for a lot of people between science and faith. The best I can say from the science side is that there was something there before the inflationary period, before the Big Bang, but we don't know what it was. It was probably some like super dense, super hot universe where like quantum fluctuations were super important. But all inflationary cosmology says, or all the Big Bang theory really says, is that there was something there and it got bigger. So the Big Bang theory is not really a creationary theory. It just says something existed and then it got bigger. The Big Bang theory. Whereas, if we want to switch over to Genesis and the Bible, Genesis tells us that God created the universe, and it gives a very beautiful poetic description for that. But it doesn't tell us like the underlying things that God did to create the universe. So it doesn't tell us scientifically like God did this and this and this and combined these ingredients in this way, and this is what came out. It kind of shows us the beauty of his creation. So I personally feel that those two go really well hand in hand together. That Genesis tells us that God did create, and science tells us kind of how God created.
Okay, I like that explanation. And I like... Yeah, go ahead, Sam.
I have one more question on top of that. I know the Big Bang Theory wasn't like the only theory describing the origin of the universe. I can't quite remember if there were competitors to that theory in early thought. If you know what's talking
about. Like in the scientific community?
Yeah.
I don't remember off the top of my head. There were definitely, I think many people at the time thought the universe was eternal and static, that God created the universe and therefore it was and has always been. And I think when the Big Bang theory started to become popular, it was a little bit controversial because it gave like a beginning point that the universe just wasn't always there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do we know who that was? Was that what scientist started that, or was it kind of a...
It's been a process. I think it kind of started back with Hubble, the scientist, the Hubble Space Telescope was named after, because he was looking at galaxies and out in this night sky, and you can tell by their color whether they're moving towards us or moving away from us. And if you expected that the universe was static and never changing, then you'd expect the same number moving towards us as moving away from us. But what Hubble found is actually all the galaxies are moving away from us. Not only are they moving away from us, but they're moving away from us at a faster and faster rate. So they're accelerating away from us.
Interesting. Okay.
Which if you flip that and reverse time, that would say that like if I went backwards in time, then all the galaxies are coming toward me. And if you keep going further and further back, that would all crunch down to a singular point. So that was kind of the beginning of it. And then inflationary cosmology, as we know it now, I think it kind of really got formalized in maybe the like late 1990s, early 2000s, if I remember correctly. So relatively recent development.
Okay, interesting. Well, where I was going with that, and I've talked with Sami about this a little bit in some earlier episodes, but some of the ways that I think about it, and again, I find this fascinating, but I'm not an expert. And one of my questions to Sam is like, what happened to people who died before the birth of Jesus? Did they lose their chance to get into heaven? But then this is kind of, we talked a lot about C.S. Lewis, where he helps understand this. Well, all this happens outside of what we understand to be the laws of physics. It's like the Big Bang. It's the start of the universe as we know, but if God exists outside of the laws of physics, it's not like he has the rules to follow. Plus, did time like even exist before the Big Bang? I don't know if that's how that works.
Scientifically, it's hard to say, again, because we're not quite sure what there was before the Big Bang. Like if there was something there, then time probably existed. You could you can come up with theories in which the universe like began at a point in time and then grew from there, and there wasn't time before that. But there's no reason to think that that's actually what happened. Those kinds of theories are associated to a singularity at the very beginning, and singularities are bad. We usually try to get rid of singularities.
What is? Can you expand on that? I mean, when I hear the word singularity, I think like Big Bang, like it's an infinite, piece of mass that blew up. So what do you mean by a bad singularity in this case?
Yeah, so there's actually two singularities that we often talk about in physics. One is the Big Bang. The other, which I think is a little bit easier to think about, is a black hole singularity. So take a star and collapse it to a point where gravity takes over and nothing else can stop it. And it comes this runaway collapse, and the star collapses to an infinitely small point. So you have some massive thing that's been compressed to zero volume, basically. So the density is infinite. There you get like infinite curvature of space-time, and that's a singularity. Anytime these infinities come up, there's a singularity, and that's bad.
Like makes the math hard to do bad.
It breaks the math. Yeah. The math.
Well, is that why? Well, I mean, you said like we try to get rid of singularities. Like, what is? I can't imagine some astronaut going and trying to fix a black hole.
No, sorry. Yeah, that's a good point. It's we try to get rid of them in our theories.
Oh, okay.
When a singularity pops up, like for a black hole in our theories of gravity, that's an indication that the theory is breaking down, and we need a better theory that can describe those situations more appropriately. So, for example, we're trying to come up with quantum gravity to describe black holes, and the same thing with the Big Bang singularity. We need a theory of quantum gravity in order to really understand what's going on there.
Is it kind of like in calculus when you're doing like limits and you come to the equation if x is 0, so you do it as x is approaching 0, and you try to get as close to the singularity as possible so that you can figure out how close you can get without it screwing up because infinity's fine. Interesting.
But also on the maybe the theological side of your question, Max, about like, was there time before the Big Bang? If we believe that God created the universe, then we believe that God created space-time, and we believe that God created time. So God exists outside of any notion of space-time that we have.
So this is fascinating because black holes are cool, except for when you have to do math at your level. So do we know? You said like the center of a black hole is it's like a point that has an infinite amount of density, right?
Yeah.
Do we know? I mean, what exactly is at the center of a black hole? I was asking about like wormholes and some other things and how that exists in theory. I do kind of have a lead-on question going into this.
Sure.
I don't know if you can speak more about what we know about black holes and what happens if you go in one, aside from probably dying.
Sure. I mean, we know a lot about the inside of a black hole, but there's also a lot we don't know. So I can tell you what happens to you if you jump inside, but at the very center of the black hole, we don't know. And we really need like a theory of quantum gravity, which is actually my area of research. And that's a whole side tangent that
in case you guys couldn't tell, Kenny's a little bit of a nerd.
Huge bit of a nerd.
Okay, well, there was, and again, I don't know if this is just from the science fiction books or whatever, but where I was going with this was multiverse theory. I don't know if you just have any thoughts on that, if black holes tie into that, if wormholes exist, because the question was going to be if there is an infinite number of parallel universes, how religion ties into that, if there's one God for all these universes, if people in these other universes who never met Jesus if there's still that kind of heaven. What are your thoughts on that? And so, sorry, just while I'm on that, I've talked with Sam a lot about this, but even though the universe is huge, and I think there's other intelligent life somewhere, even if we haven't found it. And I don't think there's intelligent life close enough to come to Earth. But I mean, didn't the government even say like a couple years ago that like, yeah, there's aliens, big deal. That I mean, I might be bullshitting here, so like, please correct me. But I feel like the universe is so big, there's got to be something somewhere. How do these creatures that aren't on Earth, how do they tie into religion, and how do they get, how do they follow Jesus if they've never been to Earth and if they don't know what the hell we're talking about?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess two questions there: one multiverse and then one alien. So I'll start with the first one, and then after I've ranted for long enough, you can stop me and tell me to go to the second. But multiverse theory is a very interesting topic and a very debated topic, and has a lot of different uses or ways it comes up in physics. But let me start with one way. So we talked about this like the Big Bang is this being with this inflationary period. We had something was there, so like very super hot, dense universe, and like our universe grew out of that. So you had this really inflationary part, and then everything after that. Well, who's to say that like that didn't happen again somewhere else in that same kind of primordial universe, if you will? So maybe you had this like big primordial universe that's super hot and super dense, and like here our universe like big banged out of it, and maybe another universe big banged out of it, and maybe another universe big banged out of it. So there's a possibility that this like primordial universe kind of maybe gave birth to lots of different universes. And one way that this argument kind of comes up is it seems like our universe is kind of fine-tuned in a way for life to exist here. There are certain physical parameters that if they were tweaked slightly, it would have made it much more difficult for life to exist. For example, Newton's gravitational constant, which controls how strong gravity is. If that was a little bit stronger, then everything would have collapsed into a big black hole by now, and life wouldn't have existed. So you could ask, why is it that our universe has these right parameters in order for us to be here? And some people like to use this as a fine-tuning argument for the existence of God. I find that kind of unsatisfactory. I don't want to limit God to fine-tuning parameters. So one possibility is maybe you have all these different universes that were born, and they all have maybe slightly different variations of these physical constants. Maybe in our universe, the gravitational constant is one value. In our neighboring universe, it's a slightly different value. And there's this kind of anthropic argument where we exist in this universe because it is the one of many that has the right parameters for us to exist. And in all the other ones, the parameters are a little bit off so that life can't exist. So if maybe I'll use this as a segue, if life did exist in these other multiverses, then it's kind of similar theologically to aliens existing in our universe. So let me segue to aliens then. So I also find it likely that life exists outside of Earth. I mean, the universe, our universe is really, really, really mind-bogglingly big. And so you have, how many millions, billions, trillions of planets, and who's to say, there's so many possibilities in that equation that life could definitely exist elsewhere. I find it personally, this is me personally, I find it the most likely that life does exist, but it may not be intelligent life, in which case there's not really a theological question there. Maybe on other planets there's bacteria, or maybe even there's a lizard or two, and they don't, have to ask theological questions. But if there is other intelligent life, I think that is a really interesting question theologically of like, how do they relate to God? And I have no scientific or theological answer for you, but I do recommend that you check out C.S. Lewis has a space trilogy.
Oh, does he? I didn't know that.
He does. He has a sci-fi space trilogy, and it's amazing. So the first book is called Out of the Silent Planet.
I'm adding it to my wish list.
They're really short, so they're actually super easy reads.
Okay.
But the first one's Out of the Silent Planet. The second one's called Paralandra. And then the third one, which I haven't actually read yet, is called That Hideous Strength. And it's about, you might have guessed, it's about aliens and how they relate to God. And I think it's fascinating. You know, of course, it's a story. So I'm not going to base my theology or my science off of it. But I think it's really compelling and interesting, and definitely ask those kinds of questions.
Okay, yeah, I will definitely get into that. If you don't mind me jumping in for a second, the way you kind of described it is the universe is very fine-tuned for us to live here, which kind of our presence, when, you know, against all odds, it kind of points to the existence of God. I read it somewhere, and I forgot what book, and I just had to borrow the internet to figure out what word I was looking for. So I apologize if you said this already. But what I was being led back to is something called the anthropic principle.
Yeah.
Did you mention that?
Yeah.
So that's like you're saying everything is fine-tuned. And, you know, the odds of us existing here are, you know, I'm making up a number, but, you know, like quintillions to one, something like that.
Right.
On the other hand, like we are here to observe it. So the fact that we're here, it's hard to explain. But I mean, you know what I'm saying, right? It's like if we didn't exist, well then, like we couldn't observe it in the first place.
Sure.
So,
yeah, there's definitely this idea that like the universe allows us to be here, and by us observing the universe, we like bring the universe into existence. It's kind of a poetic idea more than a scientific idea. But let me also say, like, one thing that I think is true is I don't think science will ever be able to prove or disprove the existence of God. I think that is not within the wheelhouse of science. So whenever I hear someone giving a scientific argument for the existence or lack of existence of God, I automatically am skeptical.
Okay.
So kind of continuing off of that, there's, you know, these fine-tuning arguments that, you know, the universe is precisely tuned for us to exist. And some people have used that to give evidence for the existence of God. I don't deny that that's possible. God certainly could have done that, and that might be the real story. But I don't want to settle there. As a physicist, I want to get down to like the bare bones of what's going on, and to stop and throw my hands up and say, well, you know, the parameters are the way they are.
Right.
God must exist then. That's very unsatisfying to me.
Yeah, and I was talking with Sam about that last week. The scientist Richard Dawkins, I think is his name. Have you heard of him? I just watched the South Park on it a couple days ago. And again, I don't know much about the guy. I don't mean to criticize. I'm sure I agree with him a lot of things. But it seems a little bit more closed-minded because you're using science to explain everything, even though, you know, science can explain a lot, but it can't explain. Yeah, it doesn't explain everything. Plus, we're talking about miracles. You know, like the birth of Christ from the Virgin Mary, whatnot, which typically science wouldn't allow. On that note, I know I put this in our doc, which I think either you or Sami commented on here. Someone told me this, so again, if anyone listening wants to fact check me, please do. I thought at some point Stephen Hawking proved in his head that there was the existence of a soul. Again, I could be making this up. I don't know if anything like this ever made it into writing, but I see you had like a contradictory comment. So I don't know what you know about Stephen Hawking's. Was he too scientific to believe in?
Yeah, I know that Stephen Hawking was an outspoken atheist because.
Okay, I didn't realize that.
Given how smart he was, I think that he was kind of in the mindset that, like, if we had enough time, we'd be able to figure this out. Like, there's a scientific explanation to everything. And he was just beginning to scratch the surface, and people continue to learn more and more about it. But I think he was so technical and smart and visionary in his mind that was kind of his belief that you could explain everything. You could break everything down eventually. But I just Googled that question to see
Okay, that's
what
fair.
his stance was, and the quote was that he thinks about the brain like a computer, and everything that we do as humans can break down to operations happening in our brain like a computer, and then when we die, it's just shut off. So I don't think I saw anything about him proving.
Okay, that could very well be. Again, I wasn't totally sure, and I know we were chatting about this as we were prepping here. Kenny, sorry, I forgot if you were in the room or not, but there was an episode of Breaking Bad where Walter White is working out on a whiteboard the precise composition, what atoms make up a human, and he was able to account for like 99.999% of the human body, and just could not figure out what this extra piece was. And it was like, oh, that's the whole point. It's like, oh, is this proof of the soul? And of course, it's a fictional show, but I thought it was kind of fun.
I've heard like actual experiments being done to try and like measure the weight of a body like right before and right after death, and like take into account, the air in their lungs and everything. And supposedly, I don't have a reference for this. This is just something I heard a long time ago. Supposedly, they found an unaccountable weight difference from before to after.
Okay.
And so there was these, headlines for a while of like, oh, the soul weighs 0.7 pounds or something. So I think that the human body is extremely complicated, and it's probably very difficult to actually do that measurement to a degree of accuracy that would be required to do that. Yeah. Nor am I convinced that the soul has mass. So
that's it's interesting. I mean, I don't know if you have the article, but if you ever come across it, I'd love to read it if you want to send it our way. That'd be
I'll have to try and find it.
Well, it's interesting stuff. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's the SpongeBob, but you think of a soul as a pickle.
I have maybe something to kind of add on to it, and I'm also reflecting and processing on everything that's been said already. But when y'all were talking about the multiverse theory or the potential existence of other life, and how Kenny's feeling is that if there is other life, which it's really hard to say, of course not. Like, it's so huge, you never know. But that intelligent life might be exclusive to what we know or to God's creation, and kind of what distinguishes us from other creatures that happen to have formed in the universe. And with the soul conversation, we might get into this, but God like breathes his life into Adam and Eve when he creates them, and that descriptor isn't given to other life forms. Like as he's creating plants, as he's creating animals, it doesn't say like God breathed the breath of life into these animals. It's only with Adam and Eve and everybody after them. So and that also kind of brings up the question of like, okay, we have evidence of cavemen. Were they before, at the same time, or the same as Adam and Eve? Are those different? So it just brings up a lot of questions of like, if these human-like creatures existed, were they also made in the image of God? Did they also have like souls or the breath of life in them as well? And would aliens not have that either? So kind of souls with potential other beings that aren't necessarily in the same category as like humans as image bearers of God.
And we know from Disney that all dogs go to heaven. So I feel like they have souls. On that note, I know we got a couple more slides if you want to touch on it. There was a quick clip I wanted to show too, but maybe you can transition into evolution in a sec. But Kenny, have you seen Men in Black?
Oh, of course.
Sam?
A long time ago, but yes.
Oh my gosh, we gotta get you educated here.
Sorry.
Anyway, end credit scene of Men in Black. Let me just.
Yes.
You know what I'm talking about, right?
I do. This is fun.
Yeah. Whoop, there you go.
It's like Horton Hears a Who.
tool was created.
What do you think? Is anything like that possible in your mind? Do you think we could be a tiny marble of some other massive civilization?
Sure. I mean, I can't say it's not possible. And honestly, this is one of the wonderful things I found about my job is like my job is to think about all these different possibilities and like put some like, physics behind them and say, what's possible and what's not. And I really enjoy those kinds of speculations.
It's cool stuff. I mean, it's just kind of, it shows how big the universe is. Like we have no idea. I mean, we don't know what's in the bottom of the ocean, and it's like the universe is just so freaking big. But sorry, we're going to transition into evolution here. So one of the questions that I've had, we were kind of bringing up the topic of whether or not other creatures have souls. In the Bible, I think says in some form or another that man is created in God's image, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I don't think we're done evolving is what I was going to get at. I mean, we've come a long way over, the last 2,000 years, not in terms of evolution, but in terms of technological progression. But that doesn't mean like we're going to halt all of a sudden just as humans. Like there's more to go, which means that when we turn from something human into something not human over the next 100 million years or whatever, is that creature still going to have a soul and have a place in heaven and whatnot? And Sam, I think I know your answer to this, which is we're going to have the rapture or something.
I hope so.
Yeah, we got some cleaning up.
Anytime now, honestly, that could be as soon as
come on, man.
Possible.
Yeah, I mean, Kenny, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, like evolution's an ongoing process. Do you have any opinions there? And then we can kind of dive into Adam and Eve and Neanderthals and whatnot.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I want to start this off by saying that I am not a biologist, so I know the basic, stuff around biology and evolution. But as a physicist, I am woefully unprepared to really go into evolution. But I can share some of my personal thoughts. I agree that we're not done evolving. I would be curious to know, like, how much technology and modern medicine have maybe like slowed down natural selection to some amount. And I'm curious what that effect would or is having on our species. But I at least from a knowledge and wisdom and technological perspective, we're definitely evolving. So maybe that's an interesting thought of our evolution as maybe transitioning from biological to technological. But
yeah, actually, I got to throw in all the movie references, right? You've seen Idiocracy. Have we talked about that?
I love Idiocracy.
This is one thing that I know Dad has talked about where it's like, I mean, people, I don't know if we're actually getting dumber and dumber, or if it's just some people in our generation because of technology, but that was kind of what he was saying as well. People are going to be really dumb 500 years from now because a lot of idiots are breeding. But then I was making the argument, well, okay, the movie, first of all, fiction, but also 500-year timeline on an evolutionary time scale, that is nothing. So I feel like we still got a ways to go.
Yeah, and I like to say that, we talk about the world is becoming either a better place or a worse place. And I think it's actually both. I think, we're becoming the world is becoming a better place and a worse place at the same time. And I think it's going to continue to be that way. And you can probably say the same thing of general intelligence. I think in many ways we're going to become smarter as a species, and in other ways we're going to become dumber as a species. But we'll try it out and see what happens.
Plus, again, not anything I'm an expert on, but I think the general lifespan of a human has increased substantially over just the last 100 years. I don't know what the average lifespan is for man now, but it's mid to late 70s.
Yeah.
Something like that. There are people that have lived substantially longer. I forgot what the world record is, but isn't it something like 120 years?
I think so. Usually Japanese guys. Good for them.
Well, because there's an interesting book you might like, Kenny. I'm happy to give it to you, but it's written by what's his name? David Sinclair, I think is his name. Wrote the book Lifespan, And I sent Sam a picture of this guy, and he's like 50s, and he looks like he's in his late 20s or early 30s. My point is that we're within our lifetimes, we might see people start living like 150. I mean, living substantially longer than what we understand to be now. And full immortality, I don't know if it's actually possible, but the way things are going, I mean, I wouldn't completely throw it out. But if somebody wanted to live forever, it seems like it could be achievable, or at least potentially. Again, I'm rambling a little bit. I'm not an expert, but potentially stop aging at some point. I don't know, but
yeah, I'm personally skeptical of that. Nor would I personally want to live forever.
No.
I wouldn't want to live forever, but I don't know, 1,000 years, that would be kind of cool. He'd be a smart dude.
You're getting into some like Dune Book 4 territory there.
Our Earth cannot sustain that.
So there was like the movie Chappie where you could die as a human and then just have your conscience uploaded to a robot.
Those are fun sci-fi stories.
I have another thought about. This isn't necessarily a scientific reason why I don't believe that humans will continue to evolve to an unrecognizable stance millions of years from now, but also like a theological and looking at Revelation where it's talking about the rapture. It's not like I don't tend to think that we're going to evolve so much by the time that happens that like the humans talked about in Revelation are still very much recognizable, and they even sound pretty similar to some of the things that we're experiencing now, like the nation of Babylon. It's advanced in the sense that like they're wealthy and they have all these leisurely things, and they're focused more on power and wealth than they are on God. And I think it's kind of a theme throughout Scripture that God tends to check people when they're trying to become more like him. So like Adam and Eve eating the apple in the Garden of Eden, or the Tower of Babel, like people trying to do things to be more like God typically leads to their demise. And I think that this trying to live forever or trying to get science down to a T, that you're trying to become more and more like God, does not bode very well, at least from what I've seen about God. He's like, if you keep trying, I'm going to keep like, I mean, for that more.
I see what you're saying. I mean, I agree with some of it, but I disagree on a lot of other stuff. Like we're trying to live longer. Like there's nothing wrong with making healthy choices and trying to live a good.
Right. I think there's a difference between trying to steward your body and like take care of it than like having the idea that you want to live forever out of your own.
Well, let me
capacity.
Maybe something in between with. Because I see what both of you are saying. I think something in between. I know you all talked about Genesis last week, and we're talking about the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and might ask the question of like, why did God kick Adam and Eve out of the garden after they ate this fruit? It's like, isn't that sounds kind of harsh,
right?
Like, why would he just do that? And if I think if I remember correctly, if you read when he kicks them out. He kicks them out so that they don't eat of the tree of life, the tree that would make them live forever, give them immortality. And my personal interpretation of that is that humanity just wasn't ready yet. You know, that God had created us, and he was working to grow us and to mature us. And eventually maybe those things would have been available to us when we were ready for them. But we weren't ready yet. And so he was removing us from this other temptation that we weren't ready for. So I think, had creation gone as planned, we would have eventually reached immortality, but we would have done it in a good and helpful way guided by our Creator. So, based on that, it might be possible for us to reach immortality. I'm not confident that we could do it well on our own, though.
Well, it seems like that was the default. Like Adam and Eve, had they not sinned, had they not eaten from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they would have lived forever. Like the fact that death would eventually come to them was a result of the fall. So like in a non-sin world where we're entirely united with God, the fall never happened. Like death would not be part of that, but death is part of it because of sin and the fall and the brokenness of the world and humanity.
And I was asking during that episode whether or not the Garden of Eden is supposed to be like a metaphor for heaven. Like if you're already in heaven, like you're kind of living forever. That is your immortal life. So the whole, I don't know if it's like the whole point, but a big part of religion is you have immortal life or eternal life like after you die and go to heaven. So if we try to bring that down here, you're thinking that's what would piss him off.
I think that's one way to phrase it. Yes.
Okay.
I think you lost me a little for a second. Bringing heaven to earth in certain ways is like our goal, but trying to become immortal, absent from God and out of our own strength is competing with God, which God does not want for us. He wants to partner with us and achieve that together rather than us trying to beef ourselves up to be more like him on our own.
Yeah, like I'm not saying you should go try to be like Voldemort, but generally trying to be healthy, trying to live a long, fulfilling life.
Yes.
It's a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, I'm surprised I made it this far, but if I made it to 200 years old, like that'd be kind of cool.
Yeah.
People, I mean, I didn't really look into the science of this. I wish that I had time. But in the Old Testament, when it's recording people's lives, people live like hundreds upon hundreds of years, which is crazy. Maybe it's because weren't dinosaurs so big because there was more oxygen? Or that was maybe one of the reasons. Maybe that had to do with lifespans too. I have no idea. This is all theorizing, but weird stuff.
It's very cool. So I'm trying to show something here. So just for the sake of showing what I was talking about here, Kenny, if you had to, well, I think I just told you the answer, but I mean, just for fun, how old does this guy look to you?
Oh, geez, is this the guy you were talking about?
Yeah, this is him. So
yeah, he looks 20s.
Yeah, he's 55.
Wow.
So I don't know if he's 55 in this picture, but I imagine it's somewhat recent, like last couple of years. So still pretty damn impressive. He wrote an interesting book on it. So I don't think it's meant to compete with God in any way, but I mean, if people could live for 200 or more years, imagine what they could accomplish and the kind of knowledge that they could accumulate and how they could use that to ultimately help humanity. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, I think it's a classic example of like, what we do as humans, the things we come up with aren't inherently bad, but they can be misused.
Sure.
Like, even there's so many modern day examples, social media, AI, these can be inherently good tools, but they can be so misused. And I mourn for the fall. I mourn for the fall happening, because if it hadn't, then we would have been able to do all of this alongside God, and he would have helped us to like see those pitfalls and avoid them. And, we would have been so much better off for it.
Well, that's fair. We're talking a little bit about evolution here. We brought up the Garden of Eden. I know you had a slide here on Neanderthals and how they relate to Adam and Eve. Did we want to touch on that?
Sure. This was more of like my personal wondering, because of course, like, we can't know. We get such a zoomed in view of what's happening from the biblical account of creation, and it's very much zoomed into Garden of Eden, what's happening there with Adam and Eve. But as we talked about in the previous episode, there's this whole world outside of the garden that we don't get to see as much. So I think that question mark leaves a lot of flexibility for evolution and dinosaurs and cavemen and stuff. So that's just kind of a question that I had about, like, were cavemen existing outside of the Garden of Eden? And I know that somebody didn't just like make up these caveman skulls. Like, I've been to a cave in France that has remains of human-like beings, and the skulls look just like that. The one on the left is a caveman skull. The one on the right is a gorilla skull. So it was a gorilla, or a chimpanzee. I can't remember, but there's just so many similarities, and like they were explaining the evolutionary purpose of the like overarching brow bone and stuff for sunshade, and we can see how that has kind of made its way out of our skeletal structure over time. But like, I think most people agree that these beings, they weren't quite apes, and they were certainly more like humans. So that always just kind of confused me because it seemed like Adam and Eve weren't described in this way that cavemen are described as. And so that kind of makes me wonder if this was all happening outside of the garden and weren't necessarily the same image bearers that we and people like Adam and Eve having received the breath of life from God, if they're just two entirely different categories or if they're related. It's a big question mark for me still.
Well, I think it kind of relates to we're clearly evolved from monkeys, yet we can go to the zoo and see monkeys. It's an ongoing process. It's not like you switch all of a sudden. There's a ton of overlap.
Right, and I think there's a lot of different perspectives on that. Like some people would say, okay, just because we are related to and have so many similarities with monkeys doesn't mean that we're evolved from them. I'm not making that as a statement, but there's certainly similarities, but the progression of like this leads to this, leads to this. I think a lot of people would disagree with that.
And this is pretty accurate, right? We were just talking about this. Maybe that is the end of evolution.
Yep, we just go back to apes.
I know.
So we very well, I mean, it's really hard to say. I think, like I said, the wanderings of what's happening outside of the garden, and even we talked about like, yeah, there's a lot of incest in Genesis, and Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel and their direct descendants probably did sleep with each other to procreate, but there's also these other beings, and we talked about the Nephilim and stuff like that outside of the garden that contributed to the gene pool as well. So I don't know.
And I know
to throw this out there on this topic, kind of some of the things that Sami was saying about like, emphasizing what's going on outside the garden, or is there evolution happening outside the garden? There's this book called The Genealogical Adam and Eve. It's by Dr. Joshua Swamidass. He's a computational biologist, and he had this thought of, could it be that you can have your cake and eat it too? That like evolution is happening outside of Eden, but God, creates Adam and Eve inside Eden, and then when he banishes them, then they go and procreate. So highly recommend. I haven't read the book myself, but I've heard the book is very good. There's also the Bible Project, which I think Sami's talked about before. Yeah. They have this series on ancient cosmologies, which I think Sami referenced last week as well, which is as a series is excellent, and I highly recommend. But they interview him as a part of this series. And it's a theory, we don't know if it's right or not, but I think it's kind of compelling and interesting. So maybe there is a way to have our cake and eat it too.
Well, I think that's a better argument. What I find difficult is, and I think we have more common ground there. I don't know if it's other Christians or maybe I'm confusing with Catholics, but the ones that would deny evolution in the first place, that's where they start to lose me, and everything they say after that, I kind of zone out. Like this is fact. Like help me understand this without completely denying it. Yeah. So I think you make a far better point there.
Yeah, I agree. I think evolution should be a part of the story.
Okay, and I like that idea.
If I was a god creating animals and plants and nature, like I would want my creation to be dynamic and to survive and not get wiped out by one natural disaster. And that's what natural selection is. So I think it makes sense.
I kind of want to play devil's advocate a little bit and pretend that I am one of our like very conservative and what's the word? Like traditional cousins.
Yeah, I was going
to evolution. I know our cousin was talking about how he didn't believe in macroevolution, he only believed in microevolution. And to some extent, I get that. Like, okay, if you don't believe in microevolution, that is absolutely proven. We've seen it. Like, that's what Darwin studied was the finches and how their beaks are changing and all of that. And that's how we found out animals adapt to their environment. But he was looking at it over the course of years and not millions of years. And yes, we have fossils, and yes, we can connect, like, this looks similar to this, and these features are similar. But there's still so many gaps. And I think that those that don't believe in that macroevolution scale see all that and acknowledge that all those different fossils and stuff exist, but they're not necessarily convinced about the way that the dots have been connected. And I really think that that's okay. Like if you believe, and this kind of goes back to like old and new Earth theory, is like the old Earth theory is like this stuff slowly progressed over millions and millions of years and maybe developed from each other. But new Earth is like God created all of this kind of as it is, and then maybe microevolution occurred from there, and we see some slight deviations over time. But people are in both camps. I think that I definitely have other reasons for not being in the new Earth camp. Definitely more in the old Earth camp. But I think, obviously, microevolution, I think that most people are on board with that. But I think the macroevolution, thinking that we developed from fish, is quite the jump for a lot of people. And I think that's fair.
Well, so, I mean, kind of to your point, you're talking about our family. And obviously, of course, I love our family. But some of our extended family is extremely religious, which is fine. But some of those beliefs, they get a little wacky. Like I think one of our uncles said, and it's not like I'm naming any names or picking, but I think when you ask them how long has the Earth existed, and they say 4,000 years, and I'm like, okay, come on, dude. Like it's pretty much fact that it's not correct. Like I want to understand your religion and viewpoint better, but that's a little ridiculous. And like you're talking about the new Earth theory, which you have up here, and I know we've kind of discussed that before. Like the universe was created in 6 literal 24-hour days. Like that doesn't make any sense to me. We didn't even have a day. The days did not exist until the Earth existed. Like that's how do you measure that? That's ridiculous. I don't get that part. Is that a fair statement on my side?
Yeah, I think it's quite the jump, and I don't think people are really reading into the context or looking at sources outside of the Bible when they think that the Earth was created or the universe was created in 6 literal days. I think they just read the text and it says day, and they're like, okay, cool, that's what I'm going with, because I believe the Bible, and the Bible is the complete source that I need to figure out everything. And I think it gives a lot of truth and a lot of hints, but I think it's a crime to look at it outside of context.
Right.
So, I mean, God created the heavens, the earth, the sun, like all of that existed before humans. So like days in terms of the earth revolving around or rotating and revolving around the sun, like that existed in God's head because he knew what his whole plan was, but it wasn't like humans had kind of mapped out the hours and figured out sundials and all that quite yet in history. But that is kind of a piece of new Earth theory that I'm not super on board with, just because the language, even the word, I think I said this in a previous podcast, the word for days in the Old Testament, I believe, is the same word used for seasons, like in Ecclesiastes, where it says there's a season for everything, a time to live and a time to die, a time for peace and time for war and stuff like that. And so that refers more to a vague amount of time, which I think, again, isn't mutually exclusive from like evolution, because we know that in evolution, the first thing was the ocean and the ocean creatures and the land creatures and then humans. And that's the same general order that we see in Genesis, is like light, vegetation, sea, land, humans. And so if those days, quote unquote, are vague enough, it could capture potentially those millions of years where those things were flourishing. But from a New Earth perspective, I think it was 6 literal days. And even if you can like carbon date something back, they're like, oh, maybe God just made it appear to look like it was a million years old. Really, it was brand new. That's kind of what they're like. God could do that. I think Kenny was speaking to this once, where he's like, yeah, God could poof the universe into place in one day, and to a scientist, it might look like it's millions of years old, but it's like being born when you're 40. Like, if you're able to grow and develop, why don't you just grow and develop? So I think Kenny was saying in a conversation we were having with somebody, like, God put all these laws in place for things to kind of naturally progress. So it makes a lot more sense for him to just like let them naturally progress. He has all the time in the world, than to poof something into existence to look like it's X amount of years old already. So there's a lot of trouble that I feel like I have with the New Earth theory, but that's kind of
is that specific to Christianity, or is that a Catholic thing, or is that kind of both?
Catholic and Protestant.
Yeah, it's just based off of the biblical account of creation.
Yeah.
Like the way that they get that 6,000 years is they're like, okay, six or 7 days plus now we have all the accounts of this genealogy from Adam until the end of the Old Testament, and we're just going to work backwards because the genealogies tell us who was born to who and how old each person was, so we can get a general idea of how many years have passed. And so that's kind of how they get that 6,000 years old.
If I could add some things here, a couple of things. One, to like highlight this book, The Genealogical Adam and Eve, again. So one of the questions that Dr. Swamidas asked is, if you have, evolution happening outside of the Garden of Eden, and then at some point God creates Adam and Eve, and then he sends them out, and if they start procreating, how long would it take for Adam and Eve to become the ancestors of every single person on Earth? That Adam and Eve have their children have children, this a tree that continually grows. How long would it take for that ancestry to cover the entire Earth? The answer that he came up with through his means of computational biology was about 6,000 years. And so my point being is that there are ways for both Genesis to be true and science to be true. So if someone out there is wrestling back and forth with these kinds of questions that we've been discussing between science and faith, and how do I reconcile these things when on the face they seem very disjoint, I would encourage you to think creatively and look for people who are thinking creatively, because it is possible to reconcile all of these ideas of science with ideas from the Bible. So that's possible. Another thing I'd like to add is in this whole question about young Earth versus old Earth creationism, personally for me, whatever you want to believe, please feel free to believe. I'm not going to tell you to believe one way or the other. I do think science supports the old Earth. However, the part where I have the most trouble is when these kinds of things, these kinds of ideas are used to sow distrust in science. And I think that has become a problem, especially in the past decade. If we look at the Bible and that tells us to distrust science, and then we start talking against vaccines or against masking or against other public health things, then people die. And as a result of that, there's so many deaths that have come just by distrust in science. And that's not what our faith calls us to do. Our faith calls us to take care of our brothers and sisters, our neighbors around the world. And science can help us do that. So please, whatever you believe in your personal faith, that's okay. I'm not going to try and convince you one way or the other, but please trust in science. People are doing it for good reasons, and it helps improve people's lives and keep them alive.
I like that. I think, to your point, a lot of people have died from not trusting science. There was an episode of, I think it was Family Guy or something, where one of the characters was babysitting a baby of a very Christian family, and the baby was really sick, and the parents refused to get him vaccinated because they believed that God would heal him. And then, I think it ends with the family taking him to the hospital against the parents' permission or whatever. But the point is, God, he gave us the resources to make these vaccines and evolve and get smarter and make the science, do these things to help us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I like your point on that. I think that's very well said.
I agree.
Yeah.
Have you heard the joke about the man with the flood?
Oh boy, no, I have not.
Okay, so quick joke. All right, so there's this man. He has a house, and a big flood comes, and he goes up on the roof, and he's like, "Please God save me! Please God save me!" And a boat comes up, and they're like, "Come with us. We're rescuing you. We'll get you to safety." He's like, "No, God's going to save me. He's going to carry me off. He's going to save me." And so the boat drives off, and the man's like, "Please God save me!" And helicopter comes, and they're like, "Come with us. Your houseboat's being swept away. Come with us. We'll save you." And the man's like, No, please go. God's going to save me. And so the helicopter flies away, and eventually the flood, does wipe out his house, and he dies, and the man goes to heaven, and And man's like, God, why didn't you save me? And God's like, well, I sent you a boat and I sent you a helicopter. Like, why didn't you take him?
Okay. Well, I like that. I did hear that actually in The Pursuit of Happiness, the movie. I think
it's a classic one, I'm sure.
Yeah, I agree completely. Like, you have this stuff in front of you. I think it's just kind of a matter of seeing it, I suppose. But I like that. I think that's a very good way to think about it.
Yeah. I also think that goes both ways. Like Kenny was saying, that don't use Christianity as a excuse to forego what we know to be true from science. And I think that goes opposite too, where these two things are like inherently at war, and people use science as a way to disprove Christianity. And in some ways it's really hard to reconcile the two. You got to do some work to like believe that these things can coexist. But I think just to put things into context and give some grace to the people writing the Bible, and specifically Genesis, like this was not meant to be a scientific account at all. So the fact that we are holding it to scientific standards is really unfair, and it should not be a means to disprove Christianity in the same sense that Christianity should not just be a means to disprove science, because they're kind of talking about two different things, and those things complement each other. But Genesis was written to describe these big concepts in a very poetic way, in a very beautiful way, and not like these people, when these were written down or recorded and passed down, like we thought the earth was flat at that point, and now we know that not true. But like it kind of just shows how much our perspective has grown. But this isn't being written today. This was being written thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago. So just for both sides to have some grace for the other and to see God in both of those things.
Do you know much about the flat Earth theory, by the way? I don't want to digress too much, but it's.
What is
I feel like it's pretty self-explanatory.
There's some weird shit. Like, if the Earth is flat, like what keeps the water from falling off? And I think their explanation is.
Is it a bowl?
Well, no, it's. I don't know if it's supposed to be like the ice caps or something holding the water on, but you ask a flat earther what's on the other side then, like what's holding it up. And do you know what? I could be spewing bullshit, but this is what I heard. Some flat earther, I think, said it's on a turtle's back. Like the entire earth is like being held up by a turtle. Like that's the oh god.
So it's more like a semicircle.
I think there was an ancient, like maybe Native American cosmology, if you will, that was like we're living on the back of a turtle who's swimming through the cosmos.
Yeah, it's oh god.
And then the question was, okay, what's the turtle living on? Well, the turtle is living on another turtle, and that turtle's living on, so it's turtles all the way down.
It's like Rudolph the Turtle, right?
Yeah.
Turtles all the way down into infinity.
Well, and again, I really want to plug this Ancient Cosmologies podcast again, because my previous thought was like, oh, we have so much better science now. We know so much better than these ancient people did. Like, obviously we're better because we have all this technology. We can do all these fancy measurements. But like, I listened to this podcast and it completely changed my view. It's like, no, these people were doing the exact same thing that we're doing. We're looking out at the stars and we're trying to figure out what place we have in that. And they were doing the exact same thing and like looking out at the world and saying, okay, what does all this mean? And they did such a good job. And especially what this podcast does is they compare the story of Genesis with the other creation narratives that the Jewish people were surrounded by, and how they compare and contrast and what that says about God. And that's such a beautiful thing that they did, and they did such a good job. So I completely agree with you, Sami, that like we shouldn't, with our science nowadays, look at that and say, wow, they were so stupid and dumb. Like, if only they had the telescopes that we have now. It's like, no, they found, like, they looked at the world and found meaning in it. And that's like super, it was amazing what they did.
Yeah.
And yeah, to your point, and to be fair, like I'm not criticizing generations far in the past. Like if we existed I don't know exactly when we proved it, but say we existed 1,000 years ago. Like, if I was there, yeah, I probably would have gone with the norm and thought the Earth was flat too. It's not.
Sure.
I'm not calling them stupid, and like looking into the future, 1,000 years from now. I mean, I think we're all kind of stupid today, but they're especially stupid.
We're all stupid in our own unique generational way.
Max, that comment wasn't directed at you. I was just.
Getting back to sciencey stuff though, dinosaurs. That's fine.
You should show the meme that I put on this slide.
Right, yeah. So who doesn't love a good dinosaur? Yeah. So what's the deal here? Who wants to take this one?
I can start, and Kenny can tag off. Kind of to segue from what we were just talking about, like obviously we know a lot about dinosaurs now. People are archaeologists for their jobs. I don't know if that was a job title back in the day, but the extent of fossils and bones that we found, we have a library that they did not have at the time. So if there were dinosaurs when the Old Testament was written, they probably hadn't found them yet, or don't have the knowledge that we have. There were mentions of two very large beasts in the Old Testament, which could be separate from or in the same category as dinosaurs. The only tricky thing is like if these humans were writing about them, they were like coexisting, or at least the humans had some sort of knowledge of these creatures, whether from fossils or from legends or from seeing them. I'm not sure exactly. But there's a Leviathan, which I think is more of a legend. I'm not quite sure the context in which it's mentioned in the Bible, but it's kind of this like sea serpent beast that they talk about. So kind of like a violent Loch Ness monster type thing, which maybe existed as one of those like prehistoric sea creatures that we hear about in fun evolutionary documentaries. Behemoth is another one that's mentioned in the Old Testament, and particularly in Job. And what it says about it is that it's a large grass-eating animal. So we know a lot of dinosaurs were herbivores. My favorite movie, or not favorite movie, favorite series as a kid was The Land Before Time, and like Littlefoot
Naturally
is my favorite, and he's a vegetarian. So I don't know, it could be one of those long-necked dinosaurs. It could be a number of things, but
okay. I'm just sorry, I didn't mean to jump in here. I was going back to remember that show we watched when we were younger, Walking with Monsters, and it kind of shows evolution. You're talking about a Leviathan, and there's a lot of big, freaky-looking fish. I thought Megalodon was like one of the biggest creatures of all time, but I was just looking here. I guess the biggest creatures to exist ever, blue whale is number one, but two, it says specifically Leviathan, an ancient sperm whale is what it says, 12 to 13 million years ago, 57 feet long, weighing 50 tons.
Cool.
A little right up there with your mom. No, I'm just kidding.
No, we have the same mom.
Oh shit, I forgot. I feel like I have to
My
throw
mother-in-law you're talking about.
I gotta throw in a yo mama joke while I can. Sorry, Mom. We'll see if she gets this far. I'll wait for
She watches
text in a couple days. We'll see whether or not she's actually listening. Good little test.
So,
it's interesting.
like large creatures that don't exist today, at least as we know them, were spoken about in the Bible. So like that leaves a lot of room for flexibility. Who knows? And I think it's also, I don't think that these words necessarily have to describe a single species. They might be a general word for various large creatures. Who knows? So one of those things that like, it's potentially vague enough to merge those together if you want to, but it's not the most satisfying answer, but it leaves some room for interpretation, I think.
I'm just looking at some pictures of Leviathan when you Google it, and one of them looks like Godzilla.
So if I could throw in a couple of theories as well.
Yeah.
Some of my favorites, there's theories that like Leviathan is actually a hippo and Behemoth is a crocodile.
So they're really cute.
Those probably would have been around the other way. Okay, one of them was a hippo, one of them was a crocodile. So because those probably would have been around at the time that Genesis was written down, and they may have just called them Leviathan and Behemoth. Another thing, I think Sami already touched on this a little bit, if, dinosaurs existed pre all of humanity, of course, they died. There were bones, and they, like you said, they didn't have the archaeology that we have now. But who's to say some large bones didn't show up? And people were like, "Oh, what the heck is this? Oh, this belongs to a mythical creature called Leviathan or Behemoth." The last thing I'd like to throw out there, again from the Bible Project podcast on ancient cosmologies, Genesis chapter 1 talks about this sea serpent or this massive creature. I don't think it says Leviathan or Behemoth, but of this type, just frolicking and playing in God's creation. And that was an intentional choice, because many other creation narratives at the time in other cultures, they revolved around some hero or some god wrestling and defeating some large creature like Leviathan or Behemoth. And that was their way of describing creation. There was this chaotic creature, and the hero came, wrestled it, conquered it, and created the world from it. Where what the writers of Genesis are doing is saying, hey, that creature that in this other narrative they had to wrestle and subdue and conquer in order to create the world? Our God is so big, that creature is a plaything in his world. So some of these, mentions of these creatures are coming from this like cross-cultural, like, hey, you see that thing over there that's so bad in that story? It's just like a pet here. Our God is that cool.
Kind of like Hercules and Pegasus.
Yeah.
We just watched Hercules literally last night or 2 nights ago.
Great movie. Yeah, whenever I need to understand religion, I just watch certain Disney movies. Maybe that's. Okay. No, this is good stuff. Sam, I know you had some more fun stuff in here too. This is kind of leading into the flood potentially. So maybe Kenny, I don't know.
The dinosaurs getting left behind. How crap was that today? Poor guys. Some people believe that that's how dinosaurs went extinct, but I think the theory is pretty well supported. So I bet they were gone before.
Well, it was a meteor, right?
Maybe not a meteorite. Yeah, whatever the size difference is, a big one.
But there was surviving life. Was it just? I forgot how long ago this was. And Kenny, maybe this is. I don't know if this is your specialty or not, but that's the theory, right? Is when land creatures got wiped out, and then it was surviving sea creatures that. How did that work? I forgot.
Well, that is certainly not my specialty. My specialty is black holes.
I also.
But that I could very well see that.
You go ahead, Sam.
I also was wondering, how? So we live in Colorado, and there's like the dinosaur footprints area that you can go see, not too far from like Golden area. That's super cool.
Yeah.
I'm wondering about, maybe I should look at a map of like where we've found fossils, dinosaur fossils over time, and if they tended to be places that humans weren't yet. I can't remember what the concentration of dinosaurs in like ancient Mesopotamia, where the Garden of Eden / early humanity was, like the Fertile Crescent area. So I'm not sure. But some of these creatures that we now know to be dinosaurs, maybe that species did not exist in the geographic area where the people in Genesis are developing. So maybe they had like some species there and some species that now we've discovered in Colorado or elsewhere. Who knows? But
wait, are you trying to say that you think humans coexisted?
No. I'm saying that dinosaurs could have happened in a different region before people. I could be totally spitballing and entirely wrong here, but dinosaurs could have been a lot of places that humans weren't before humans came into the earth. Yeah, Adam and Eve. So
also, again, I don't know when this was on the timeline of everything, but the Pangea, back when everything was one continent, was that prior to any life on Earth whatsoever? I don't know how that.
There was life.
There was life. Okay.
Yeah, so because one of the pieces of evidence for Pangea, besides like the shape of the continents, is that you can find like fossils of animals on like Eastern South America and Western Africa. They're the same.
Right.
And like there would have been no reason for them to have been able to get over, except if like South America and Africa were touching at some point.
Interesting. See, you are an expert. You're too humble.
No,
Yeah.
no.
What I might have just said could have been entirely stupid, but
I think that, this is probably getting into territory that like I definitely don't know about. Like I have friends that know a lot more about this than I do. But I think, dinosaurs as a collective term spanned, however many millennia of years. And there's a whole variety of them. And I think life was all over the earth at this point. So, yeah, I don't know.
Okay, interesting. I know you had some more stuff on the flood here as well, Sam. Did you want to?
sure, yeah. So we can move past on whether or not dinosaurs were wiped out by the flood or by a meteor. Most likely a meteor. But yeah, so Kenny's a theoretical physicist and knows a lot about black holes and the Big Bang Theory. I'm a hydrologist, so I was more
Hydro means water.
What'd you say?
So hydro means water.
Yeah, good job. So I study water. And so naturally, I was a bit more inclined to research the flood and kind of breaking this down to like the traditional and face value interpretations of scripture, which some Christians fall into that camp. I do not. And the more scientific, plausible explanation for the flood, which was more regional rather than global, which is kind of the camp that I fall in. But I just kind of summarize the details of the flood to sort of set the scene. Because the idea of a global flood sounds wild. So just to break it down a little bit, Genesis is very detailed in terms of the timeline of how the flood happened. So it says the 17th day of the second month. So just obviously these month breakdown did not exist back then, but let's just say February 17th, 17th day of the second month. The floodgates of heaven were open. That was rain. That was springs. And it said that rain fell for 40 days. So that takes us to March 29th, like a month and a half later. And then after that, it said that water flooded the earth for 150 days. So after all that downpour and all the springs releasing water, that water continued to flood the earth for 150 days or 5 months. So that takes us until, let's just say July 17th, to put it into our modern calendar. On that day, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat, which is in modern day Turkey. And then even after that, even though the ark had made landfall on a mountain, it took another, how many months? A few months until October 1st to be able to see other mountain peaks. And then quite a ways later, 4 months later, the earth was completely dry again. So it took quite a long time for all of that water to subside. So that's a buttload of water. And my question as a hydrologist is, where the heck did all that water come from? Because there's only so much water, as we know, on Earth. It's either in the air or on land or in the ground, and it doesn't just appear out of nowhere. Like it's in one of the systems.
Yes, agreed. A worldwide flood is where I'm like, okay, that's kind of again where I start to zone out. So what's hopefully like a more figurative, more figurative view of this is the only way I would be able to accept it.
Right. And I wouldn't even necessarily say it has to be figurative. I think it's just like within the system that they understood. Like, as we're talking about, they didn't
like you could have
a concept of how big the earth was. All they knew was kind of the area that they're in. And that area is still huge. And even the literal interpretation is like when it says God flooded the earth, the word for earth, I think I say this in a later slide. I can't quite pronounce the Hebrew. It's like eretz or something. It's also translated to mean like land or ground
water world
or more like how we think about earth in terms of like rock and like natural things rather than earth as a planet, as a globe, because they didn't have the globe. They had the idea that everything was flat and they hadn't seen a lot of it yet. So like hydrologically speaking, I don't think a flood is like a worldwide flood is scientifically possible. Sure, God could throw in some extra water if he wanted to, but once again, like he put the systems in place. Why would he mess up the own systems that he put in place when he could just let it kind of happen naturally? So that literal interpretation of a global flood, I don't quite think that is valid, especially with the translation of that word for earth. I think also where the theory that it was a global flood comes from is it's talking about this very encompassing language of like, I'm going to put an end to all people. I'm surely going to destroy both them and the earth. And so this idea of total destruction, I think, led to the idea that it was a global flood. But once again, like, we don't know how far reached humanity is. And as far as we know, it's still in that like Middle Eastern region that Adam and Eve and their descendants was still in. They hadn't made it over to North America yet. They hadn't made it over to East Asia yet. So all people isn't necessarily global to the extent that we think of it now. And so a more reasonable theory that I think is still very much in line with this language that they're using is a localized flood in that region of like modern day Turkey, Iraq, like where the Tigris, Euphrates rivers are. And I also found it interesting. You can go to the next couple slides to that map. So we know, like from history class, ancient Mesopotamia, earliest civilizations, all that, it makes sense that life was really concentrated in this area. And these rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, are used in a lot of literature over ancient history. And so Christianity is not the only written source that describes a large flood. The Quran also mentions a large flood. Other stories in Babylonian times talk about large floods. So it's not exclusive to Christianity. So if you're going to pick fun at Christianity, if we're talking about this big flood, pick fun at these other things too, because I think the people were in agreement that this happened.
Plus, I mean, you do have, I don't know, like specifically which regions, but I mean, tsunamis are obviously a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
That shit happens. And Kenny, I don't know if you want to jump in on this part because it involves gravity, but I mean, obviously, like the moon is responsible for tides. And I think it was the Neil deGrasse Tyson episode on Joe Rogan. He was talking about how like the water bulges off the earth, and the earth kind of rotates through it. Am I understanding that right?
That's correct.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean that is true, but that's on a cycle of months, which is way too short for the cycle Sami just described.
Okay.
Now, if there was a large, body of water covering this region that Sami is describing, that would affect things for sure. But I don't think the tidal forces from the moon could explain the whole.
Sure. Yeah. No. Okay, that's fair.
Right. I also wonder, like, ecologically, what the environment looked like at the time. Like, we just got back from Costa Rica. It was very rainforesty. There were a lot of large plants. It was really humid. It rained all the time. And I kind of think of that almost like jungle-y landscape in the Garden of Eden. Like, so much water is in the atmosphere that maybe it was carrying a lot of water that could rain down like unimaginable amounts. Who knows?
Yeah, and like we're saying, some regions just have a lot more rain. Like you're saying, Costa Rica rainforest, it has its name for a reason. Like Scotland, England area rains all the time. Some regions are just more susceptible to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and that could have also changed as the climate of the planet has changed.
Right, and the climate of the planet changes a lot, as we know. Even with our lifetime, the climate of the planet has changed a lot. So, also, geologically speaking, in terms of the topography in the area, if you go to the next slide, I just put a topographic map of that region. And you can see that it's very mountainous, so a lot of features that could hold water. Also, rock isn't very porous, so it's not like it's going to drain super fast. It's going to take a long time, which it describes in the account that it takes several months for the waters to finally recede, which makes sense. It's not like it's flooding in a desert and it drains in a couple days. So if you're focusing in on the rivers and the mountains, there definitely leaves a lot of areas for water to be held, even the Mediterranean Sea, the Black Sea, the Caspian Sea. And then where I put that star is the mountains of, what was it? The mountains of Ararat in like right around modern day Turkey, Iraq, that the Bible notes that Noah's Ark landed. So that's right in the center of all those mountains. So you can see like,
oh yeah, here
it does create kind of a bowl feature that very well could have held a flood for that long and taken a long time to drain. There's only so many outlets to the ocean there. So I was looking at this mountain too, and I did find that I was confused because it said, on July 17th, for instance, the Ark lands on this mountain, but then it wasn't until October 1st that you could see the tops of other mountains. And I was like, wait a second, where did the top of this mountain come from? This is the tallest mountain, so it makes sense that it would take a while to see the other mountains. It's thick, almost 17,000 feet tall. We're in Colorado, and that's tall by our standards. So I'd like to go there. That would be really cool to go climb. Not all the way up. I'm not that brave or stupid. So another interesting thing, this, might be a stretch, but something that's definitely interesting. This picture on the bottom left of the slide is showing a site where some people believe that this is where Noah's Ark landed. This was found in that mountain range right on the border of Turkey and Iran, where the Bible described the Ark landed. And the dimensions of this are right around the size of Noah's Ark. So the formation's like a little over 500 feet long. The Bible says the Ark is so many cubits, which translates to about 450 feet long. It makes sense to be a bit bigger because of the impact it probably made. And then you can see that it kind of slopes in the sides, and then there's some accumulation in the middle, and that's just from erosion. But if you imagine that you took a boat and shoved it into the land, it would be more concave. And then they did rock samples in the area and dated some of, I don't know exactly how they did this, but dating the activity in that area to between 3,500 and 5,000 years old, which conveniently is around the amount of time if you backtrack to when Noah's Ark happened. So it's just kind of interesting. Once again, not definitive proof, but something that people who are really gung-ho on the literalness of the story look at and say, okay, that's pretty cool. That's kind of cool that we have that. And, you never know, but certainly fun to think about. And obviously a lot can change over 5,000 years. So who's to say if something would have stayed for that long for us to see it now, but certainly is fun to speculate.
Yeah, that's good stuff. And again, I like the saying a worldwide flood. That's when I'll roll my eyes and be like, okay, guys, let's. That's a much better explanation. I like the detail you put in here, especially as a hydraulic engineer. That's much more helpful. So thank you for making it more reasonable for someone as cynical as I am. So let's see. We talked about Big Bang, creation of the universe, Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve again, evolution, dinosaurs, flood. What else do we need to touch on here? I mean, in terms of science, is there anything else in particular? Kenny, I don't know if this was your slide or if this was something Sami put in, but some of the major scientific discoveries in history, if that's anything we need to talk about. Pythagoras is the triangle guy.
And they're looking back at some names that we recognize and their scientific discoveries, just to put into context, how far we've come scientifically and how much they didn't know at the time these stories were written. The discovery that the Earth is round was around 300, 400, 500 BC. So right before Jesus came. But these stories that we're reading about are thousands of years before that. And then we didn't realize that the Earth revolved around the sun and not the other way around until Copernicus came around in the 1500s. We didn't know about galaxies until Galileo discovered a lot of features of our galaxy, like the Milky Way and Jupiter's moons, and then even laws of motion didn't come until after that in the 1700s. So there's just a lot that we consider really basic and piece of cake now, but the fact that these things happen thousands and thousands of years after we're talking about here, and like Kenny was saying, these people in the times of the Bible aren't stupid. They know their context and they're working with what they have, and it still talks about mapping the stars, and there's still units of measurement, and there's still units of time and stuff that they've figured out with their own tools. But even the stuff that is just second nature to us now took thousands and thousands of years to discover. So just to give credit to the people writing on behalf of God, the scripture that we're reading, it's just an entirely different context, and we can't use these things that took thousands more years to discover as a way to criticize these people that were so far removed from that.
Yeah, I'm with you there, and it's again like we know all this now, but if we were alive back then, it's not like we would have been any smarter. And then 1,000, 2,000 years in the future, we're gonna look like idiots still. Like there's gonna be so much we learn.
When Star Trek happens.
Star Trek happens. I still gotta watch Star Trek. I can nerd out about a lot of things, but I actually have not watched much Star Trek. I know the characters, but I got to dive into this.
I keep meaning to get a list, make a list of episodes for you, but
I do have a list. Whoops, I got my charts up here. I do have I think I have access to all the episodes now. JD was kind enough to
cool. That's
lend me
great.
everything. So yeah, I'd love to get into that. Anything else we need to touch on? Because I could talk about this stuff all day just for fun, but Kenny, again, as the honored guest, anything else you want to touch on as far as Big Bang or physics or theories in the universe that relate to religion? This is interesting.
Yeah, I think there's a lot we could talk about. I can go on for hours and hours about quantum gravity and quantum mechanics and whether or not we have free will or everything's just unitary evolution. Or...
We have free will?
I don't know. My personal thought is we have free will, but we have less of it than we think we do.
Okay. Interesting. I like that.
Yeah. I just think about like the number of conversations that you have where you're, you just automatically say, "Hey, how are you? I'm good. How are you? How's your day? My day was good." Like just kind of automatic responses we have every day.
Or in my case, somebody asks me, "Hey, what's going on?" And I say, "Good."
Yeah, exactly.
Here, enjoy your food. Thanks, you too.
Yeah, thank you too.
I like that. I think this is definitely a good discussion. Obviously, I want to be respectful of people's time here. Because I
have one more thought. Or a couple more thoughts.
Okay. Please go ahead.
I think obviously I think everything that we talked about in this episode has to do with the Old Testament, but I know that you also have some scientific qualms with the New Testament, like the resurrection and the virgin birth and stuff like that. And I do think there's a distinction between like what's explainable or at least reserved for science and then what is miraculous. But at the same time, I also think if somebody 2,000 years ago saw what was happening today, they would say a lot of that stuff's miraculous too. So maybe miracles is just God's like absolutely incomprehensible knowledge of the world and science. And 2,000 years ago, if somebody saw a plane, flying in the air, they would think that's magic. But now we know like scientifically that's possible. So maybe a lot of the things that we see as miracles seem to be miracles, but really it's just because God he invented science. He invented all the laws of physics and everything, including what we understand and what we don't understand, and he knows how to use those. And so maybe these miraculous things that we don't know how to explain now and may never know how to explain are either just plain miracles or they're just so beyond our comprehension that they appear to be miracles. But nonetheless, like God knows how everything works. He can do what he wants. And you read the C.S. Lewis Miracles book. I need to still, but there's certainly a lot of examples in the historical and modern day world of things that we just can't explain.
There's and I think I might have even quoted this precisely before, but just because I showed the clip from Men in Black, there's a quote from Men in Black that got kind of popular that I really like, which is 1,500 years ago, everybody knew the Earth was the center of the universe. 500 years ago, everybody knew the Earth was flat. And 15 minutes ago, you knew that humans were alone on this planet. Imagine what you'll know tomorrow. It's kind of good.
Oh,
yeah.
Goosebumps.
Anyway, good stuff. Kenny, this is fascinating. We'd love to have you on. I guess maybe I don't know if we'll do a part 2 directly following this, but as soon as we get into more science discussions, I'm sure we can come up with some more specific topics that I think you'd hopefully want to get in on.
I'd love that. Yeah, thank you.
Sam, I know I was late to throw some memes in here. I got a couple, but I think you had one as well, which this sums things up nicely, doesn't it?
Let's go.
Science is the study of God's creation. I was saying this the other day, but Stephen Hawking is an example of somebody who he's so smart and his knowledge is a reason for him to not believe in God. But on the other hand, a lot of people are so smart and their knowledge compels them to believe in God. And I think it really depends on the attitude that you have going into it. So.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. There are plenty of smart guys and scientists and theoretical physicists who believe in the existence of God. Like people think, you're a scientist, you must be an atheist or whatever. But it's surprising how many of them are pretty heavy in religion as well. It's cool stuff.
Yeah.
I didn't have any memes specific to science, but I had a couple just typical God Christian memes that are kind of cute. I can appreciate goth culture. That's cool. Sam, I know I sent you this one, which I thought was.
Oh no!
Let's see what else we got. This one was a little too relatable recently, but it's getting better, hopefully.
I think you need to explain this one to me. I didn't get it. I don't know that much about Jehovah's Witnesses.
The guys go door to door.
Oh,
yeah, that's it.
Which I was going to ask if you have any opinion on Jehovah's Witnesses, but we don't have to go into that now.
Enough.
What else do I got? That's kind of creepy. And you know what? It's
creepy. That's very realistic. Well, not realistic because he's white, but
that's scary as shit, though. Like, I mean, I hear that. Like, going to grandma's house, like especially when we were younger. I mean, even now, like I know she's not in the house anymore, but that place is like creepy and haunted or something.
Yeah,
it's just very relatable. You know what else is relatable is this one.
Or worse, kneel.
What's that?
Kneeling.
Oh, thank God. I'm glad I don't have to kneel anymore. No. Anyway, good stuff. I think that was a good use of time. Actually, we wrapped it up quicker than I was thinking. I was thinking talking about science, we're going to go for like over 2 hours, but we're sitting at 2.5 or 1.5. So pretty good timing there. I mean, any other comments here as we wrap up? We got through the memes, so I think we hit on everything.
I'll just leave with one comment. I had a science teacher in middle school who was really influential for me, and he once wrote in my yearbook, he said, remember that science in some small part reflects the glory of creation. And
I like that.
I think that has really been a motivating motto of my career.
Nice. I think that's a great way to end it. Well, thank you again, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Sami. Thank you, Kenny, for joining this episode. I'm sure we'll have you back here shortly. But it was very good stuff. Science is a fun topic. Sam will have to discuss another, the next episode idea offline, but we'll get that up and running sometime here soon. But once again, thank you all. Thank you, Sami. Thank you, Kenny. And we will see you next time.
Thank you, Max.
Bye.